The scratching started subtly, a whisper against the silence of my old Victorian house. I initially dismissed it as the wind, a common occurrence in these drafty rooms. But the wind doesn't scratch. The wind howls, whistles, and moans, but it doesn't meticulously, deliberately scratch at the walls. It began about a month ago, shortly after my wife, Eleanor, passed. Grief, they say, can manifest in strange ways. Perhaps the scratching was just grief burrowing its way under my skin, a physical manifestation of the emptiness she left behind. I'm a writer, or rather, I was a writer. Eleanor's death seemed to have stolen my words, leaving me stranded in a barren landscape of thought. I spent my days wandering the house, touching her things, and inhaling the faint scent of lavender that still clung to her pillow. The scratching became a constant companion, a metronome marking the passage of my increasingly desolate days. At first, it was confined to the walls of the master bedroom, a frantic, intermittent rasping. I tried to ignore it, reasoning that mice had taken residence within the walls. I bought traps and scattered poison, but the scratching persisted, mocking my efforts. The exterminator I called found nothing, declaring the house rodent-free. "Old houses make noises, Mr. Davies," he said, his voice laced with a pity I didn't appreciate. "The wood expands and contracts. Pipes groan. Things settle. You'll get used to it." But I didn't get used to it. The scratching grew louder, bolder. It moved from the bedroom to the hallway, then to the living room, following me like a malevolent shadow. It was no longer the skittering of small claws, but a deliberate, rhythmic scraping, as if someone or something was trying to claw its way into my world. Sleep became a luxury. The scraping would intensify in the darkness, a relentless assault on my sanity. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows, indistinct shapes that vanished as soon as I turned my head. I jumped at the slightest sound, my nerves stretched tighter than violin strings. One night, I awoke to find myself standing in front of the living room wall, my hand pressed against the cold plaster. The scratching was deafening, vibrating through my bones. I could feel it, a frantic energy emanating from the wall, reaching for me. I stared at the wall for what felt like hours, convinced I could see the faint outline of fingers, desperate to break through. That was the first time I questioned my sanity. I started drinking, a desperate attempt to silence the scratching and the growing chorus of doubts in my head. Whiskey became my solace, my shield against the encroaching darkness. It dulled the edges of the world and softened the harsh reality of my loss. But it also amplified the paranoia, fueling the delusion that something was lurking in the walls. The scratching wasn't just in the walls anymore. I could hear it in the floorboards, in the attic, in the very foundation of the house. It echoed in my skull, a constant, maddening rhythm that threatened to shatter my mind. I began to see Eleanor. Not the vibrant, laughing Eleanor I had loved, but a gaunt, spectral figure, her eyes hollow and accusing. She would appear in doorways, at the foot of my bed, her lips moving silently, as if trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. I would reach for her, desperate to hold her again, but she would vanish like smoke, leaving me gasping in the cold, empty air. My friends tried to help. They suggested therapy, medication, a change in scenery, but I refused. I couldn't leave the house. Eleanor was here. I was sure of it. And the source of the scratching, it was somehow connected to her, to the house, to something I couldn't quite grasp. One afternoon, I found myself in the attic, rummaging through boxes of Eleanor's belongings. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mothballs. The scratching was particularly frantic here, emanating from a far corner of the room. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind a stack of old paintings, I found it. A small wooden box, intricately carved with twisting vines and grotesque faces. It was locked. I tried to pry it open, but the wood was too strong. Frustrated, I grabbed a hammer and smashed the lock. Inside the box was a journal, bound in faded leather. I recognized Eleanor's handwriting on the first page. My hands trembled as I opened it and began to read. The journal documented a period in Eleanor's life I knew nothing about. Before we met, she had been obsessed with the occult, with rituals and seances, and contacting the dead. She wrote about a dark entity she had summoned, a being that promised her knowledge and power in exchange for something. The details were vague, obscured by cryptic language and frantic scribbles. As I read further, a chilling realization dawned on me. The scratching, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the journal. From the entity Eleanor had summoned. It was trying to break free, to escape the confines of the box and claim its prize. And then I understood. Eleanor hadn't died of a sudden illness, as the doctors had claimed. She had been taken, consumed by the entity she had foolishly invited into her life. And now, it wanted me. The scratching intensified, vibrating through the journal and into my hands. The attic grew cold, the air heavy with a palpable sense of dread. I could feel the entity's presence. A dark, malevolent energy that sought to engulf me. I slammed the journal shut and hurled the box across the room. It landed with a thud, the scratching momentarily silenced. But I knew it wouldn't be for long. I had to destroy the journal. It was the only way to stop the scratching, to banish the entity and save myself. I grabbed the box and ran downstairs, the scratching echoing in my ears. I made my way to the fireplace, the flickering flames offering a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. I threw the box into the fire, watching as the flames licked at the wood, consuming it with a ravenous hunger. For a moment, there was silence. A blessed, glorious silence. I stood there, trembling, tears streaming down my face, convinced that I had finally won. Then, the scratching started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the attic, or the walls, or the floorboards. It was coming from inside my head. It was a frantic, desperate scratching. A chorus of voices clawing at my sanity. I clutched my head, screaming, trying to drown out the sound. But it was no use. It was everywhere. Inside me. Consuming me. I looked at my hands and saw them covered in blood. I didn't remember cutting myself. I ran to the mirror and looked at my reflection. It wasn't me. Not anymore. The eyes were hollow, black pits, filled with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It was telling me what to do. I knew what I had to do. I walked to the wall. The wall where the scratching had first started. I placed my hand against the cold plaster and began to scratch. I scratched and scratched and scratched, the sound echoing through the empty house. I scratched until my nails were torn and bloody, until my fingers were raw and bones exposed. I scratched until I broke through. On the other side was only darkness and the scratching. The unending, terrifying scratching. I am part of it now. I am the scratching, and it is me. Eleanor, I'm coming.